You know, I never thought I would be that guy that buys unicorn t-shirts, but here I am, I'm that guy. I think it's really cute, and I think it should become the official uniform for the August Revolution in Reading. So let's all gear up in our unicorn t-shirts and do nothing but read. Hi, I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader. This is my September book haul, and I have a big, huge pile of books. A lot of these books are being published in September for the first time. Those are books that publishers kindly sent me, and then other books were given to me as gifts, and then some books were recommendations that I went out and bought for myself. So I'm going to take you through all these books and chat through why I'm so excited to read them. First up is The Secret Books by Marcel Theroux. It has this crazy sort of collage type cover. I don't know what you think of it. I think it's quite cool. It's about a man who escapes the drudgery of keeping a shop in Tsarist Russia, and he goes to Paris where there's a whole bohemian scene happening that he joins in on. But he also uncovers a manuscript which gives a whole new perspective on the story of Jesus. So I think it's about the suspense of that mystery and people who are trying to cover up the fact of what he found. So it's very much a novel about the process of storytelling and the role that myths and legends play in our lives. The Parcel by Anosh Irani. This is being published by Scribe UK. I'm so excited to read this book because it's sort of like related to another book I read recently, Arundhati Roy's The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. This is the story of Madhu, who lives in a hijra house, and hijras are people who are intersex, who aren't either male or female because they have both genitals. But also other sort of queer individuals live in these houses of people who are trans or identify not strictly speaking as one sex or another. And in Roy's novel, the story of her intersex character I thought was one of the most interesting storylines. And so this is a whole novel about such a character. So I'm very eager to get another perspective on that whole community. American War by Omar Akkad. This is being published by Picador, and I've been really anticipating reading this. I've been hearing so many good things about it. It's one of those books that's been getting a lot of good buzz, and I actually thought it was going to be on the Man Booker long list because it seems so topical. It's about a second civil war in America, which doesn't seem too far off from reality at the moment. People I know have been praising this book, like Helene Jeppesen on her YouTube channel. She's been talking about it. So this takes place in the year 2074 when the Second American Civil War happens, and it follows the life of a girl who's only 6 when this war breaks out, and it's about her journey trying to survive amidst this conflict and figuring out who she can trust and who she can't trust. It sounds so good. It sounds like a new take on sort of dystopian type fiction. Really eager to get to this. The Innocent of Falkland Road by Carlo Gebler. This is being published by New Island Books, who publish a lot of exciting Irish fiction, and it's about a boy named Ralph who in the summer of 1964 is left by his mother when his mother temporarily moves to America to live and work there, and she leaves him in the care of a housekeeper and her husband. And so it's his experiences, he's only like 12 years old, of coming of age and growing up and figuring out that the world isn't quite the idealized place that he always believed it was. These Darkening Days by Benjamin Myers. This is published by Mayfly Press, and this is actually a sequel to a book that Benjamin Myers published last year called Turning Blue. Now Benjamin Myers in the last year has become sort of crazy prolific because he published that book Turning Blue, and now he's publishing this book, and he published another book this year called The Gallows Pole. But he's a writer that I'm really eager to follow because I read his novel Beastings, which is so beautifully written and really powerful story. He writes about the rural landscape in such an evocative way. In this novel, one of the detectives is writing a true crime story about the case that they solved in this book, and he and the other detectives sound like they're in sort of slightly a depressive state, but they bond together to search out the stories of folk crimes that happen in this area of the moorlands that they live in. So I think in the autumn I'd really like to read both of these books, one after the other. The Mother of All Questions by Rebecca Solnit, and this is being published by Granta Books. This is a book of essays actually about feminism, and in it she celebrates the way that feminism has really shifted in recent years. I find it really fascinating to read books about feminism and hear lectures of people talking about feminism feminism. I've gone to the South Bank before to see these whole series of lectures and discussions about feminism. You always get such a lively audience because people have lots of opinions about it. So I'm going to really enjoy reading this. It has a bit of an odd cover where I think it's really beautiful in a way, but actually it's quite difficult to read the text on it. I don't know, what do you think? Next is a novel that's being published as a classic book by Vintage. It's The Door by Magda Szabo. It's about an eccentric woman named Emerence who's known to be a first-rate housekeeper, and she strikes up a friendship with a writer named Magda. It follows their slowly evolving friendship and trust over a period of 20 years, where it turns out that Emerence has a lot of secrets which come out. So this sounds like a really good read and has a really beautiful cover, I think. And finally, for the new books being published in September, I have Return to the Dark Valley by Santiago Gamboa, and this is being published by Europa Editions. Now, Santiago Gamboa is supposed to be a first-rate Colombian writer. His writing has been compared to Roberto Bolaño and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and it's the story of a poet named Manuela who had a very traumatic childhood and suffered abuse at the hands of her mother's lover, and it's about her process of trying to slowly get revenge on that. But then it also involves the story of Arthur Rimbaud, the famous poet, and how his life plays a central role in this story somehow. It also involves the story of a lot of other characters. It sounds like quite a wild kaleidoscopic tale, and it's quite a long book, so it's going to be really interesting to discover this writer. Next are a few books of poetry, which I bought for myself because I've been really wanting to read some more poetry. And this first book was actually a recommendation that came from another booktuber, Matthew Scarapa. And before I talk about this book, I want to talk about Matthew Scarapa for a moment, because this is a booktuber who seems to have just sort of exploded on the scene. A few weeks ago, I did the BookTube Newbie 2.0 tag, and in that video, I talked about in sort of advice that you shouldn't be dissuaded if your videos are quite sloppy to begin with. But Matthew is someone who's been watching BookTube for, I think, a year or two before he actually started making videos. And so when he started making his videos, it's like it was totally fully formed. He has a very distinct style and pace to his videos, and they're very well edited and very succinct, and he speaks so intelligently about books, but also in a really fun way. So I just really envy his style and enjoy watching him so much. And from when he started, he only started like 2 or 3 weeks ago, but he's been making videos almost every day. So he's incredibly prolific, and it's become my favorite new tradition where I have my cup of tea in the morning and I watch his new video. So I'll put a link down below to his channel. Definitely go and check it out, subscribe to his channel, like his videos, do all that good stuff. But this book which he recommended and which I bought is called The 50-Minute Mermaid by Nuala ni Dhomhnaill, who is an Irish writer who actually writes in Gaelic. So her poems are translated in this by Paul Muldoon, who is also a poet. And these are poems which discuss the history of mermaids, but they also get quite fantastical. I think it talks about portals to other worlds, and I think it just sounds amazing. And it's also quite interesting that the poems are published so that there's the Gaelic on one side and then the English translation on the other side. So I'm very eager to read this. Matthew talked about this specifically in the context of Women in Translation Month, because August, as well as being my Reading Revolution month, is also a Women in Translation Month. And I feel really guilty. I haven't had quite enough time to really engage and participate in it that much. I've read 1 or 2 books by women in translation, but I really should have read more, but I've been so busy reading the long-listed Booker books. So I'm so happy to have this on my shelf now, and I hope to read it soon. Next is another book of poems, which was first published a few months ago by Kayo Chingonyi, and it's called Kumukanda, which is a word that means initiation in Zambia, where the author is from. It's about the rites of passage that all young boys from this particular time have to go through before they're considered a man. So these are poems that reflect a lot about the state of masculinity and celebrating what it means to be British and not British all at once. I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of male poets write about the state of masculinity, like Andrew Macmillan has done recently so powerfully in his book of poetry, Physical. You know, it seems like a natural thing, doesn't it? If these sensitive young men grow up not quite fitting into the mold of what traditional masculinity looks like, they're gonna write poems about it, aren't they? But this book of poems sounds so good. I've heard really good things about it. The writer Nikesh Shukla, who edited the anthology The Good Immigrant that I talked about in the Anna and Eric book club, really highly recommends it. Then there is Mr. Universe by Rich Goodson. This is another slim book of poetry. exploring issues of the male body, about narcissism, shame, and sensual epiphany. Now, I don't want it to seem like I'm only focusing on reading poets that are writing about masculinity, because I've read a few other female poets this year, but I've not actually read any male poets so far this year, so I'm eager to get to these two books. Next, there's a classic novel, Narcissus and Goldman by Hermann Hesse, which I was given as a gift on World Book Day when I met the author Zoe Duncan for lunch. She wrote the beautiful novel The Shifting Pools, which I talked about in the first part of my June reading wrap-up. And she is such a talented writer and a really beautiful, lovely person. So I really trust her recommendations, and Hermann Hesse is one of her favorite writers. I've read his novels Siddhartha and Damien when I was younger, and I've always been eager to read more of his fiction. And it's the story of Narcissus, who is a teacher at a monastery, and his favorite pupil called Goldman. And Zoe described these characters as sort of two halves of one person, that they sort of represent different aspects of our personality, and she described it in such a fascinating way. I'm so eager to read this. And like I said, because it's Women in Translation Month in August, I decided to buy 2 books for myself that are by women in translation. And the publisher Tilted Axis Press, in honor of celebrating this month, had a sale on their website for their books, so I bought 2 of them. 100 Shadows by Hwang Jungeun, and this has an introduction in it by Han Kane, the famous author that won the International Booker Prize last year and who everyone's been reading. So this is the story of a slum market in Seoul, Korea, and this market has been set for demolition because a development is going to happen there. And the book cover describes how the shadows of the slum's inhabitants slowly start to rise, so that sounds so intriguing. Then there is The Impossible Fairytale by Han Yujoo. This book comes with good quotes on the back from authors I really like, both Susan Barker and the Irish writer Sarah Baum. Susan Barker wrote a beautiful novel called The Incarnations, and Susan Barker describes The Impossible Fairytale as extraordinary, disturbing and visceral in its depiction of the savagery of childhood, yet uplifting in its reinvention of literary form. And it's the story about a nameless child who tries to make their mark upon the world. It sounds so interesting, so I hope to snuggle up and read this soon. So those are all the new books that I've hauled recently. A lot of really exciting sounding books. So I think I might need to drag the reading revolution into September as well, and October and November and December. Like, let's just keep the revolution going on and on. But let me know, out of these books, what ones you're most interested in reading in the comments below. Or just let me know what books you've been reading recently in the comments below, and let's have a chat. I hope you're all doing well. Happy reading, everyone.